Hello, everybody. We need to talk about the Olympics, so let's get right into that. You probably heard there's been some controversy over the 2024 Olympics opening ceremony. People are mad about everything from drag queens to headless Marie Antoinette to whether or not this man had his hanging out or whether it was a hole in the stockings. But perhaps the most outrage-inducing element of this 26-minute long opening ceremony that has now been deleted from the internet pretty much everywhere as far as the eye could see has to do with what many are calling a mockery of Jesus's Last Supper as depicted by Leonardo da Vinci.
What are we doing wrong by saying that this is disgusting?
I thought that the opening ceremony was a disgrace, actually. I thought it was a disgrace.
As a spectacle, it's sort of not that good, is it anyway? So it's a bit sort of humdrum and drab.
The quest for liberty, guys.
The opening ceremonies completely blaspheme and mock the Christian faith.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
They didn't apologize. They didn't. Firstly, they're not sorry. This was signed off on.
Clearly, there was never an intention to show disrespect to any religious group.
Imagine watching this with your 6-year-old. I have a 6-year-old.
A group of drag queens and dancers.
It was more about the Greek god Dionysus, the god of festivities.
They are wiping the internet.
One thing they are not is funny.
It was this moment from the ceremony that invoked the sacred Christian image of the Last Supper, but it featured drag queens.
It's something that is not beautiful. It is ridiculous.
It's incredible that it took this happening for so many people to wake up.
And these people just want to show their behinds.
The amount of text messages I got, Candace, weren't you saying something about Brigitte Macron?
And to sit here and let France mock the country, mock your religion, make fun of every single thing you feel holy. This is the Last Supper. This is everything holy about Christianity. And we say absolutely nothing about it and say, oh, you cannot even complain.
And First Lady Jill Biden, well, she loved the opening ceremony.
So last night was just, it was spectacular.
I'm very open-minded, but I thought what they did was a disgrace.
This is not art.
And this really has the internet divided. Is this a depiction of the Last Supper at all? Or is it a Dionysian feast? If it is a dupe of the Last Supper, does it denigrate and mock the image of Jesus by replacing him with this? Or is it actually a way to become more inclusive and show absurdity of violence against humans or whatever? The short answer, I'm not sure. I wasn't there. But I thought because, number one, I'm not a practicing Christian. I did grow up as a Christian, but I did not grow up as a Catholic. I grew up as a Christian, but Christians believe in, the Last Supper and things. But I'm not a practicing Christian. Also, I am not a practicing member of either of the political parties, which I do think is clouding people's judgment a little bit in their analysis of these issues. And I'm also, just for the record, not in the Dionysus, which you'll see why I had to say that later. So I thought we could just kind of look at some of the evidence that's public and try to get to the bottom of what's really going on, what people are mad about, and what the historical context might be able to teach us. So first of all, let's just talk about Dionysus. Who is Dionysus? What is Dionysus? Why do we care? Why could it possibly be that people are offended or mocked by being compared to him? I don't know. So I looked into it. Also, just for the record, I originally wanted to do a moment by moment, frame by frame reaction to this opening ceremony because I do have it downloaded and I do have copies of it saved on my hard drive. But y'all, I'm literally locked out of my whole entire Instagram account just for putting up a trailer that had a couple seconds of a clip of this right here. So I'm not going to be able to play any of the video clips of this until it starts to get sorted out what tyrant is behind this at this level. But I already can't even do anything on Instagram for 2 days because I shared a clip of this, a clip inside of a trailer. So that's what's going on out here. Okay, so who is Dionysus? Well, it kind of depends who you ask. Everybody pretty much agrees he's the god of wine. At least we can agree on that. Also, he is considered to be the Greek god of fertility and debauchery and theater, among other things. Let me get my little PowerPoint up here. Oh, and this, y'all can, read that right there yourself. It depends who you ask, who his parents are in the myth, but everyone agrees Zeus is his father, And his mom was either Persephone or Semele. I don't know which one it was. I mean, I definitely wasn't there. But in the Semele story, Zeus like takes Dionysus out of her burnt to a crisp body and continues to grow the baby Dionysus in his thigh muscle for some reason. I really don't. Girl, I mean, I don't know. Y'all know those myths are weird, okay? But in the myth where the mother is Semele, then that would make Dionysus the only Olympian to have a human mother, from what I read. According to Olympioi.com, Dionysus is the face of liberation. Among the famous ritualistic orgies and his hedonistic way of living, he was actually married, apparently. So Dionysus' personality is also described on that Olympioi.com article, and they say that he was regarded as Olympus's drama king. It's giving Perez Hilton so far. He had a fiery and actually, you know who it's really reminding me of?
I want to drink until I can't see anymore. How do I throw the perfect dinner party? What do I drink? What do I smoke? Music do I play while I'm just chilling? You take a shot of this, you can't get hungover.
Benny Blanco. That's what it's reminding me of so far. He was regarded as Olympus's drama king. He had a fiery and outgoing personality, as one would expect from the god of wine and feasting. He had both good and bad qualities. He was hedonistic and carnal, as evidenced by the mysteries and the sacral orgies that occurred in his honor. His entire existence demonstrates that divine ecstasy and pleasure are transcendental experiences. Relationships, dance, alcohol, food, exotic music, and rituals performed under the influence of various intoxicants all point to the god's sensual and hedonistic nature. It says Dionysus was a nonconformist in the way that only a god could be. His cult would upend ancient Greek society's traditional values. Okay, do y'all see that? Blink and you miss it. Dionysus was a nonconformist. His cult, that means his followers, would upend ancient Greek society's traditional values. So part of the following this god or whatever is to upend traditional values, and that did indeed happen in ancient Greek society. His names, Eleutheros in Greek and Liber in Latin, refer to how he liberates people from social norms and inhibitions. Now, this same Greek god or whatever is also known as Bacchus in the Roman tradition. So Dionysus and Bacchus are the same. And if you are from Louisiana, some of these names are starting to sound a little familiar, and it's almost like they didn't tell us all of this parts about it, if you know what I mean, before they had us down at the Mardi Gras parade.
The weather's been perfect. I love Mardi Gras.
But I digress. So Bacchus, Dionysus merged into one and are today considered to be the same thing, along with this other name of Liber. And there's like, I don't know, like 11 different names for this thing. But just so you know, those are the same thing. Now, not only was Dionysus all the things we already talked about, but apparently he was also a little bit of a path who did not like it whenever he did not get his way in the mythology. According to that same website with that article we were just looking at, Olympioi.com, Dionysus was not all fun and games. He had a very bad temper. He had the potential to be very chaotic and vengeful. He had the ability, one of his godly abilities in the mythology was that he had the ability to transform humans into both divine and into animalistic beings. He would casually have anyone who disagreed with him go insane or even be murdered. That included not only those who directly denied him, but also those who even opposed his followers. And then they reference unaliving that did happen in the mythology. Now, other of his godly powers and abilities were shape-shifting and changing what he looked like. His regular shape-shifting into a lion or a bull earned him the nickname Bromios, which means the one who roars. Aside from that, Dionysus' most powerful ability was the ability to drive mortals insane. Okay. He had the ability to instill a ritualistic frenzy in his followers, earning him the title of the Liberator. And if you will remember, of course, I'm not going to be able to play any clips, but if you will remember from the opening ceremony, that was one of the themes of the ceremony. They had it in French across the screen. It's like liberté. So anyway, if anybody disrespected him, He had the ability to drive them insane. He could also intoxicate them and make them see illusions. The sacred symbols associated with Dionysus were the thyrsus or the thyrsos. It was a vine-covered staff, which has a pine cone frequently found on the top of the staff. It was the god's sacred staff, which he carried with him everywhere. It was also a common symbol in Bacchus celebrations. So the stick with the pine cone at the end is a Bacchus sacred symbol, according to this website. He also would carry with him a large goblet with 2 handles, and associated with him also are theatrical masks. Now, a lot of people don't know this. But our current modern day tradition of the theater with the masks, and you play in a character and you play in an actor and all that, it can be traced directly back to ancient Greece, and in particular, specifically to these mystery cults which were praising and worshiping Dionysus. He was the god of liberating yourself from the bounds of everyday being a human, going back to those carnal, natural animal instincts and liberating yourself from basically the higher level vibes and frequencies. So the followers of this cult were frequently encouraged to get drunk or become intoxicated on some type of substance, or just completely pretend to be somebody else, pretend to be a different character, pretend to be a different person in order to liberate yourself from your how you daily live in order to transcend. That was what this cult was trying to do. Also, finally, Bacchus, aka Dionysus, he was associated with any phallic shaped object. So, drawing phallic shaped items all over the place. He also was associated with certain animals. As we discussed earlier, he was associated with the bull. Also, plants, ivy leaves, the grapevine, those were his sacred plants. And his objects were frequently covered in ivy leaves. He wore an ivy wreath on his head, and he was closely associated with the grapevine as the god of wine. His animals were bull, panther, and lion, and he was known to shapeshift into each one of those animals, and he had a powerful roar, which we already discussed. Now, as I was reading and researching about this topic, I could not help but continue to run into the reference to, quote, ritualistic ORGIES. And I'll put a couple of examples up here just to show y'all I'm telling the truth and I really did see these. So here are 2 examples here. One we already saw earlier. He's the face of the sexual liberation among the famous ritualistic ORGIES and his hedonistic way of living. He was actually married. Then this other one, again, another time I ran into it, and it does say not only was he the god of wine making, but also of wine drinking. He was the god of intoxication and drunkenness, of festivals and parties, of ritualistic ORGIES and merriment. And then it goes on to say his free spirit also made him the patron saint of choral music and the theater, 2 of the most performative of the arts. He had a strange primal nature, which was also evident in his celebrations. According to his liberating role, he would instill frenzy in his followers and cause hallucinations. He was also the most effeminate of all of the gods and unknown by his rites would include, again, ritualistic ORGIES, in which people of all genders would freely participate. And alarmingly, I did see reference to the fact that perhaps people of all ages maybe would also participate, but I wasn't there. I do not know. So the more I looked into this, the more I learned, and I then was informed by the Wikipedia that ritualistic ORGIES is, there's another name for it. There's a couple names for it. Orgia, I think, is one name. And this is actually, apparently, according to Wikipedia, a form, or it was a form of worship. It was a form of worshiping a god or a deity. This behavior of coming together and doing the orgia, it was a form of worshiping your god. Let me show you what I mean. So here's the Wikipedia page for it. And it says, in ancient Greek religion, an orgion, more commonly in the plural orgia, was an ecstatic form of worship characteristic of some mystery cults. The orgion is in particular a cult ceremony of Dionysus, celebrated widely in Arcadia, featuring, quote, unrestrained, masked dances by torchlight and animals sacrifice by means of random slashing that evoked the gods' own rending and suffering at the hands of the Titans. So if you did not know this, which I did not, the way in mythology that Dionysus did ultimately meet his demise was he was limb from limb while still alive. So in the ecstatic celebrations celebrating him, the practitioners would recreate that demise scene. And a lot of places on the internet, they do say that it was animals. They would maybe just find wild animals, a snake, a rabbit, or they would bring some, or they would buy one, or some places have indicated that they do, or that they did use perhaps beings, perhaps of any age, but I wasn't there. I don't know. It was thousands of years ago. I really don't know. I'm just telling y'all what I saw online. So then the wiki page goes on to say Greek art and literature, as well as some patristic texts, indicate that the orgia involved snake handling. Again, I'm reading it straight from Wiki, just reading from Wikipedia. So down that same Wikipedia page, we do see the following. It may have been earlier manifestations of cult than the formal mysteries as suggested by the violently ecstatic rites described in myth as celebrated by Attis. And in these pre-Dionysian orgia, it reflected the willing self-castration of her priests in the historical period. The orgia of the Dionysian worship, so the orgias that they were having to worship Dionysus, aim at breaking down barriers between the celebrants and the divine through a state of mystic exaltation. The Dionysus orgy allowed the Bacchant, the Bacchus worshiper, to emerge from the ego, to be united with Dionysus in the ecstatic exaltation of eating raw meat, dancing, and drinking wine. This kind of bodily mysticism and psychosomatic liberation had only temporary effects at the time, the period of ecstasis. So they would get themselves all riled up. They would get all messed up. And I mean, it sounds like a freak off. Sounds like a freak off to me. Gangs all here. We got the masks. We got the people all watching. We got the, I mean, I guess she didn't talk about eating anything at the freak offs, but they eating raw meat over there. They doing substances. They drinking just to get ecstatic, to get in this state of ecstatic worship so that they could, I guess they're saying they could experience the divine if they do that. So the members of the group performing the orgia are called the orgiones, and their activities at some point were regulated by the law. Okay. So now we learned a little bit about what Dionysus Bacchus is actually all about. So let's just compare the paintings themselves, because people are saying that this scene right here is actually supposed to be reenacting not the Last Supper, but instead this other painting by this other guy called The Feast of the Gods. And I'm doing a little side-by-side comparison right here because this is what they're trying to say was inspiring. The image on the right is supposed to be inspiring the image on the left, which actually I could see, but I'm going to hold my opinion until we get a little further into the research. Now, the creative or like artistic director of the Olympics opening ceremony 2024, Thomas Jolly, he has come out and explicitly stated he was not inspired by the Last Supper at all. He was not inspired by it. He wanted it to be some kind of pagan ritual or something. So let's just take a little bit of a evidence break real quick, because I want to show y'all only with evidence. I don't want to give any opinion on anything without a piece of evidence sitting right there. Okay, so let's just stop real quick, look at a few pieces of evidence. Now, as we just saw, Thomas Jolly is telling us he was not in any way inspired by the Last Supper painting. Okay, we just saw him say that on the previous slide. But look at Exhibit A right here. This would seem to contradict. It would seem to contradict or impeach Thomas Jolly's credibility, at least to some extent. What we are looking at here is an Instagram story from Barbara Butch. Barbara Butch is a drag queen. Not only is she a drag queen, she is the drag queen from this ceremony. That is her right there in the middle of the scene. Now, if you look closely at this story that she posted, oh yes, the New Testament. And then she tagged some of the other drag queen performers. Now, it does seem as though she, at least, this drag queen, Barbara Butch, at the very least, Barbara believes that this was supposed to be referencing the Last Supper. Let's look at yet more evidence. This will be evidence checkpoint Exhibit B. Barbara was not the only performer making reference to the Last Supper in the promotion for this piece. There was a French publication which did an interview with another performer named, or who goes by the name of Big Bertha. And she also does make reference several times to the Last Supper. Now, this was a French translation. It was translated to English from the auto translate. So, you know, I'm only doing as much as I can rely on that. I don't speak French. And this title is still up right now. I mean, the time of recording this video, 3:14 p.m., July 30th, the title is still up. This is still what it's telling me the title is when I click translate. And so that would go to show that at least 2 people who performed in this show do or did at least at some point notice a resemblance to, or perhaps an inspiration by, the Last Supper. The third piece of evidence is this Wikipedia entry where it literally does call the name of the performance art piece, The Last Supper, on stage on the River Cyane. So, I mean, that's what it says right there. It says right there, the Wikipedia page. So, I mean, kind of hard to say you're not inspired by something whenever that's the title of it on Wikipedia, but I don't know. Maybe they'll change that. Here's another piece of evidence, but this piece of evidence is a counterpoint. This piece of evidence would support what Thomas was saying, that maybe he wasn't inspired by the Last Supper, but was instead inspired by the Feast of the Gods painting. There is this tweet right here from the official Olympic Games that does say, the interpretation of the Greek god Dionysus makes us aware of the absurdity of violence between human beings. There is yet more evidence that would help to support Thomas's claim. The main star, Barbara Butch, who we talked about, remember her right there in the middle? Well, she did delete that Instagram story that references the Last Supper. And not only did she delete it, but also she put up a new Instagram story, this time referencing instead that other painting about the Feast of the Gods. So why are we talking about the Feast of the Gods? Why would he be so inspired by the Feast of the Gods that he wanted to make a whole art installation for the Olympics based on it? Let's read a little bit from this description I got from this website. It says, the gods have assembled on Mount Olympus for a banquet to celebrate the marriage of Thetis and Peleus. On the left are Minerva, Diana, Mars, and Venus, accompanied by Cupid. Flora, the goddess of spring, stands up behind them. Apollo, wearing his crown and identifiable by his lyre, presides at the center of the table. Further away, we can see Hercules with his club and Neptune with his trident. On the extreme right, Eris has placed the apple of disorder on the table. Certain gods are absent, hinted at by the presence of Juno's peacock, probably because the canvas was cut away on the left-hand side. The theme of the gods' festivities was popular in Holland and sparked off a huge output of works illustrating this subject. Then it goes on to say that the artist who did paint this painting was impressed by Caravaggio's art. He talks about the satyr, which is the half man, half goat at the front of the painting that is dancing. And then we have Bacchus lying in the front. He's the one holding the grapes over his mouth. That's Bacchus. So I thought it was important and relevant to just point out to y'all that this painting, this Feast of the Gods painting, it is depicting a story from ancient Greek mythology. Okay, this wedding celebration they're at is actually kind of depraved in and of itself because the bride did not want to marry this groom. Okay, she was shape-shifting into a snake and a rabbit and every other damn thing else, trying to not have to marry this freak. And he was able to basically just subdue her and wrangle her in. So she was forced to marry him. And then all these gods show up to celebrate the wedding at this debauchery feast. Okay, now this event from mythology has been painted many, many times. These are just 2 examples, let me make it bigger, here, of times that the same exact wedding, the same Feast of the Gods was painted, okay? So it is interesting to me to note that maybe instead of trying to maybe avoid any confusion with the Last Supper, there were other feasts he could have maybe used, maybe other paintings he could have based his live artistic Olympic representation off of. He did not. He chose the one that is at a table, which does resemble another very well-known piece of art, but let's continue. Another piece of evidence I did want to point out is just the timeline. Okay, so the Last Supper was painted in the late 1400s, 1498-ish. That was painted by, or finished, completed at that time, by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, the Feast of the Gods painting, that one wasn't painted until at least 1635, which is like over 100 years later. So importantly, whenever the painter who painted that Feast of the Gods painting painted the Feast of the Gods painting, the Last Supper had already been in existence and had been painted and had been all of that for like over 100 years. So without any question or any doubt at all whatsoever, the guy who was painting the Feast of the Gods had seen the Last Supper. And so it does beg the question, is it just inherently inspired? Does it really matter about the mens rea of the copy? Yes or no? It's just things to think about as we move forward in the analysis. Just use your eyes. You know what I mean? Like, without any external input, which one do you think it looks the most like? Okay. So that begs the question. Let's say it is supposed to be the Last Supper. Let's say we finally get them to admit, yeah, it was based on the Last Supper. Even if it was, what's the big deal? So what? Who cares? Why can't someone reference a famous painting? That's the question. Well, the answer to that by some people, and I'm just telling y'all what I've heard on the both sides. I'm not telling you what I think yet. What I realized is this really comes down to the central figures themselves, not necessarily the religion of Christianity, but the Christians, the ones who are complaining, the ones that I saw, the general consensus is that it's making a mockery of Jesus himself, right? Not Christianity, the practice of the religion, but Jesus, the figurehead, the person, or I know y'all don't think he's a person, but the entity that we can identify that looks like a human, that entity, that's Jesus. And people are offended, it seems, at the comparison between Dionysus and Jesus. They're saying, no, all of this stuff that's going on here is of a Dionysus nature. And the nature of it in and of itself is what is making the mockery of Jesus. And I'm going to show y'all the evidence of what made me think those things. So first of all, I do want to just give the context that a lot of people are out here trying to tell me that Jesus is based on Dionysus, that Jesus and Dionysus both are just mythological figures that are supposed to represent a certain thing. Okay, I'm not telling y'all that I think that, okay? I'm just telling y'all there are people out here who think that because Dionysus dates back older than references to Jesus, that Jesus is based off of Dionysus. Now, when I started looking at the evidence they have for this, it honestly wasn't very strong. The strongest evidence I did see for it was that there was reference to Dionysus being able to turn water into wine. But the Dionysus water into wine story was written in the 2nd century, and it was written after Jesus had died.
Was Jesus based on the Greek god Dionysus? Many mysticists think Jesus never existed. It was just a copy of the god Dionysus. He did turn water into wine, but this account comes from Achilles Tatius, whose work is much later than the Book of John, and scholars say it is more likely the pagans were parroting the Eucharist of the Christians.
So it was actually argued that this Eucharist story of Dionysus was actually a pagan parody of the story of Jesus. And so for me, it looks kind of like we have some evidence that the pagan followers of Dionysus were parodying Jesus Christ. And so it does appear that there is at least some hint of a long history of this parodying Jesus by using the depiction of Dionysus. But some say that Christianity itself as a religion was either invented or simply infiltrated by the Dionysus cult, eventually being subverted and used as a way to cleanse the ancient mystery religions of their bad actions. And that's not coming from me, that's coming from my research, and I'll put the receipt right here.
And he is also often regarded as the prototype for Christ. Now, I'm going to stop here really quick, because that's a hell of a thing to say, isn't it? Because the way that I'm talking about him definitely seems like he's more like the prototype for Satan, which it is generally understood when you do your research into this that Christianity and its ideologies, its rituals, its ceremonies, and its figures, the doctrine of Christianity was intended to cleanse the mystery religions of their transgressions, to take the horrible acts that they committed and repurpose them for good.
Another reason that people are getting upset over this is just that it just resembles the Last Supper, and even just the resemblance of the Last Supper at all should have been obvious, they say, a small group of people. But it still, to me, begs the question, and I was still not satisfied with that answer. Like, what's the big deal? Why are you so mad? Why are you so mad? So that led me to start looking into what does this mystery cult of Dionysus actually believe? What are they doing that's so offensive that it's a mockery to compare Jesus to him? And I'll show you what I found there. Right. So are they enemies? Jesus and Dionysus enemies? Why would Dionysus' depiction be a mockery to Jesus? Right. Okay. So from what I was able to find, the ancient mystery cult of Dionysus, which means his followers, can be traced back to 1350 BC in Mycenae, or I don't know how to say any of these names. But at the time, that was a major Greek civilization. Now, the main thing associated with Bacchus/Dionysus is wine, revelry, parties, and festivals. These festivals usually included frenzied rites, Lent ritual initiations of both genders, all ages, and all social classes. This historian claims that 7,000 cult leaders and followers were arrested at some point in ancient Greece, and that most of them were executed. And the Bacchanalia scandal was one of the several indications of Rome's inexorable moral decay. There's been skeptical reception of that historian's accounts. It's up for debate. It's up for dispute. I'm just showing y'all what I found. What does seem to be agreed upon, though, is that at some point, the Bacchus-Dionysus mystery cult was taken over by the government and some regulations were put into place as to what they could actually do. The Bacchanalia rites, which are the ritual, feast, and all that other stuff we just described earlier, have been merged with the Liberalia festival. Bacchus, Liber, and Dionysus became virtually interchangeable from the late Republican era onward, and their mystery cults persisted well into the future. And even as far back as like the ancient Roman Empire, this cult of Dionysus has been being investigated and under scrutiny by the government and by the people, the plebeians, the netizens, as it were. There was apparently an inquiry. And again, this is all coming from this person Livy's account, which has been disputed. It's up for dispute whether or not this person's accounts are accurate or not, because they were writing about them 200 years past the time that the events allegedly had happened. But according to this person, this Dionysus mystery religion broke the civil, moral, and religious laws with impunity. Weak-minded individuals could be persuaded to commit ritual or political unalivings undetected at the behest of those who secretly controlled the cult right in the heart of Rome. This historian claims that the cult held particular appeal to those of uneducated and fickle mind, such as the young, plebeians, women, and men who were, quote, most like women, and that most of the city's population was involved, even some members of Rome's highest class. So most of the city's population, we're being told by this Livy guy who lived, 200 years after it happened, allegedly, or whatever, that most of the city of Rome was involved in this cult, and it was a very powerful cult. And they did a lot of stuff that would break the civil and the moral and the religious laws of the land. Now, there were several types of festivals which were associated with Dionysus/Bacchus. And as the gods kind of got lumped and grouped in together, then they would take on all these new festivals. And then Dionysus just got credit for all of them. So one such festival was the so-called Dionysia. Similar to the Saturnalia, was a time when classes came together in order to celebrate their shared origins in the natural world. Class distinctions were to agree temporarily suspended, and opportunities for public satire were made conducive by the wearing of masks and costumes by participants in the celebrations. It is believed that this festivity was the origin of the theatrical tradition. So this Dionysia celebration is considered to be the origin of theater as a whole that we know about today, this festival. And all of the Dionysus festivals had rituals, and the rituals were nasty. They had, I'm going to say some of these words. I'm not going to give a definition, so y'all can go look them up. Sparagmos, homophagia, candy, ball, ism, eating poop and other excrements, and of course, intoxication, theater, and dance. And I don't know about y'all, but as I was kind of like learning about this stuff, I was like, golly, so much of this stuff is like, doesn't this remind you of the movie Midsummer? And doesn't it remind you of like a freak off? And doesn't it remind you of just like all those like Hollywood parties, to be honest? Like the kids are treated as adults and the adults are kids and there's no class and there's no gender and and they're getting drunk and they're getting intoxicated and they're getting ecstatic. It's like reminding me of other stuff. Mardi Gras, huge. It's really reminding me of Mardi Gras. Okay, so you can pause it right here if you really want to know what the sparagmos and omophagia are, but I'm going to just keep moving right along from it. Okay, so given and considering the fact that the Dionysus festivals did have so much eating involved, eating raw flesh is literally what it says in several places of either animals and sometimes arguably non-animals. I just want to say it's interesting to me that they had the Dionysus like be served on the plate as the platter. Like it's like as if we're going to be eating him, which with all these allegations of cannibalism. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone actually still practices this mystery cult religion either. There's been a very long and enduring history of, from what I found, at close to 3,000 years, the powers that be trying to eliminate this cult. So if it would still be alive and practicing today, I would be surprised at the tenacity. You know, I mean, I don't know anybody that's claiming to be a Bacchanalianite, but y'all can put it in the comments if there is. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about Dionysus, a little bit about how that relates maybe to Jesus, and a little bit about the painting and all of that, now I want to talk about the Olympics themselves, and in particular, the ceremonies associated with them, because this whole thing went down during an opening ceremony. So before the opening ceremony ever really like kicks off, a few things do happen. One of the things happens is they light the Olympic torch, and then the torch, leaves Athens, Greece, and travels to the host country, which in this particular case was France. The Olympics was in Paris. So the way they light this thing, again, y'all can go watch this video yourself. I was going to play a clip, but I don't want to get my channel took down. The way that they would do it in ancient Greece is they would use a special mirror, a parabola mirror, and they would shine the sun on the mirror, and then the mirror would cast a light onto a torch, and then it would light the torch. Now, there were women, young girls, who their whole entire job was making sure that this thing did not go out. It was like the hearth of the temple at Hera's temple. And so they better not let this light go out. So that's how they would light the Olympic torch from that fire. Now, today they still do this ritual. They still do the ceremony of the lighting of the torch, but instead of a high priestess who is a girl from a temple, they allegedly use actresses. And this year's actress was Mary Mina, who you can see here. And she does this Greek yelping, and y'all should go watch it. I'm not going to play it here. These Vestal in antiquity were responsible for guarding the temple. They had to stay virgins or else they were buried alive. They would guard the fire, like I said, and they would light the Olympic flame. And many other elements of the modern day Olympics do date back to those ancient times as well. Other examples of this are the prominence of Greece in general in both the opening and closing ceremonies, which we did see in the 2024 opening ceremony. I don't know if y'all saw it or not, but it was like those guys that were all painted white. It was like body paint of white. So they did stick with that theme here. Another element that dates back to antiquity that we still see today are the so-called Vestal, which I did just talk about to y'all. And interestingly, another job of these Vestal was to guard a certain storeroom, a storage room in this temple. And I don't know why the website don't tell me anything else that's in this storage room other than this. But they told me, I'm gonna put it up here. I'm put it up here on the screen. It says one of the most important items is a giant wooden phallus that is believed to have been used for ritual purposes. Now, I did find some evidence as to what that ritual purpose might have been, again, on that olympioi.com, but it gets into some guy from Greek mythology, Polymenos. He did a favor for Dionysus back in the day and helped him, get to the underworld or something. And then in return, Polymenos or whatever wanted to, go to bed with Dionysus or whatever. And Dionysus is like, okay, yeah, sure, when I get back. Well, Dionysus got back. And this guy, he had died. So he didn't actually sleep with him. So what did he do? He cut a branch of a tree, shaped it into a shape, and then used the branch to demonstrate that he had kept his pledge to Polymenos to honor the desire. The shaped objects were frequently used by mysteries honoring the deity. So maybe that's why they got the I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to grasp at straws here. I mean, we are talking about thousands of year old mythology, and it's all word of mouth, and who knows, girl. Now, something important that y'all need to know. Ever since the late 1800s, every single aspect of this opening ceremony has to be meticulously approved by a committee called the International Olympic Committee. The head of that committee this year is a man by the name of Thomas Bach, which I find to be incredibly ironic because Bach, B-A-C-H, obviously the same root as Bacchus. We're talking about Bacchus, Dionysus. Now, please don't get it twisted, y'all. I'm not saying that they're related, for the love of God. It is a very old, ancient name, okay? It's like also not necessarily, it's just a root. It's not the same thing, but it is just interesting. It's something I noticed. I noticed patterns. I noticed language. I just noticed it. So just so you are aware, this is not like an accidental thing. It's like, oh, they just like let Thomas Jolly off the leash and whatever he came up. No. They are meticulous about every performer, performance, song, word, everything.
On the 23rd of June 1894, the International Olympic Committee was founded at the Sorbonne in Paris. Coubertin was the Secretary General of the Union of French Sports Associations and first proposed establishing a modern Olympic Games at its meeting 1892 and began to lay the groundwork for the first Olympic Congress at the Sorbonne in Paris in 1894. That there was still little enthusiasm for reviving the Games. Despite this, a vote was held on the 23rd of June that established the International Olympic Committee. Coubertin was elected to the role of General Secretary. The first modern Olympic Games would take place in Athens in 1896, with the second in Paris 4 years later. The IOC has remained responsible for the Olympic Games ever since.
This year, the ceremony was supposed to honor and exalt the French culture and French ideals. And so honestly, y'all, I'll insert some opinion right here. I think they did a good job at it because the more I learned about France, the more I realized this is the French ideal. And this is exactly how they've been acting this whole time. No offense if you're French, just like the same way I don't act like every single thing Americans do. There's certain things you're known for. Libertines, for example. Now, ever since the very first ancient Olympic Games, they had an opening ceremony, they had a closing ceremony, and they had a ceremony to present the medals. Today, the presentation of the opening and the closing ceremonies continue to increase in size and scale, but they are still very much so steeped in tradition. Some of the things that are from the ancient games have to do with the dove symbolizing peace, the wreath, the laurels, symbolizing what the winner would win, the flame, the hearth, the torch, all that, the cauldron. And then the closing ceremony of the Olympics would end in a huge victory celebration. Now, in ancient Greece, the winners would make solemn vows and they would perform ritual sacrifices to the various gods to which they were beholden. So, all the way back into antiquity, not only was religion a welcome and vital part of the Olympics, but actually they would make animal sacrifice. The winners would make animal sacrifices to their respective gods after they won during the closing ceremony. Now they don't do that anymore, obviously, but they used to do that in antiquity. And in ancient Greece, to open the ceremony, they would have an inauguration festival after which the athletes would take an oath to sportsmanship. So we still see this today. It might not be called an inauguration festival. It might be called an opening ceremony.
There they are, this year's tributes. Tributes, we welcome you. We salute courage and your sacrifice.
And, all that. And it might be, an oath, a promise of sportsmanship. But they did all the way back in ancient Greece. They would take an oath to sportsmanship. Another thing they used to do that was weird that I found that doesn't really have anything to do with this, but I just wanted to tell y'all. The ancient Olympians used to compete butt naked. They was naked. And not only were they naked, they would slather them in oil. And of course it was in this dirt arena. So they would get covered in dirt. Like they're covered in oil. And they're rolling around in dirt like pigs. So of course people would become covered in dirt. dirt, mud, all that. Apparently, I learned this on the internet yesterday. I don't know if this is true, but apparently they used to have people whose specific jobs it was to have like scrapers, and they would scrape this like oil, dirt, blood, whatever else was on you, mixture off the naked body and put it in jars, and then they would sell it to, it was like an ancient Olympian fart jar, except it was like mud off the, like bath water or whatever. Nasty, nasty. So we established since antiquity, sporting competitions, and theater, they were all highly connected. And I even saw that the majority of Greek athletic competitions took place in the context of religious festivals. And the religious tone of the major games cannot be denied. So it's even saying like, the whole point of the contest at all was for religious purposes and ritual purposes for the gods.
The Olympic Games began in ancient Greece in July 776 BC at Olympia as a festival with athlete events staged to honor the god Zeus. Because it was a sacred place, it was chosen to hold the games, and that's why a great part of the Olympics was occupied by religious ceremonies. All participants would swear an oath to the crowd and to the gods that they would abide by all rules and compete against each other with honor and respect. The competitors swore by Zeus that they would respect the rules of the games and fair play. 100 oxen were also sacrificed to Zeus in the most important religious ceremony of the games. To compete was a way to pay tribute to the gods. From 776 to 550 BC, the games were held at the sanctuary to Zeus in Olympia.
Now, we also know that the ancient Olympic Games can be dated back to almost 800 years before Christ. So obviously, that was before Jesus existed, and so he was literally not born yet. So I think it would be pretty dishonest to say that the Olympics were established as a Christian institution somehow. But I did come across something in my research that I have to mention here. It's very interesting, and it honestly makes me very confused. I don't know what to think about this. I will give the evidence to y'all, and I will let you make your mind up. I don't really even know. I don't have an opinion. I don't even know. So the Olympics competition as we know it today, it has not been continuing every 4 years since antiquity. And no. It was actually officially discontinued at some point. It was with an emperor named Theodosius the First, or maybe the second. It's mixed reporting out here historically.
When Greece became part of the Roman Empire, the Olympics expanded beyond Hellenic confines. Banned by Theodosius the First in 393 AD, they were again shunned by the Roman ruler Theodosius II in 426 AD.
But at some point, there was an emperor who outlawed the Olympics because it was related to these pagan practices and this debauchery. That being said, it was still continued unofficially for probably several years, if not decades, before it kind of just dwindled out. Now, the first modern day Olympic ceremony was held in Athens in the summer of 1896. It was organized by the International Olympic Committee. But that committee was entirely established by this guy, Pierre de Coubertin. So he puts the committee together, and then the committee puts on the first modern day Olympics. It's 1896. But Pierre was an unabashed Catholic. He was a Catholic. So remember everything we just learned about the Olympics? It was like a pagan ritual basically to the pagan gods, and then it was discontinued because of that. Well, it comes and rears back its little head. And when it does, the guy who brings it back is a Catholic. Pierre de Coubertin. I don't know if that's how you say his name. I know French people are real uppity about how things are pronounced. So for centuries before Pierre, there's no Olympics. It's discontinued, it's canceled, it's over officially.
Off. I've had it with you. Go the home.
I've had it officially.
But then Pierre comes along, makes a committee, and now there's the Olympics again. Boom, boom, modern Olympics is born. And Pierre, he kept a lot of those ancient Greece rituals and practices for the games, the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, all that. But he also added some new stuff. And guess what was the main major thing he added to the Olympics? A Catholic mass called the Mass of Truth. The Mass of Truth. The Truce Mass. And it was supposed to be like a blessing to say, nobody anybody when they're on the way to compete in the Olympics. Like, can we have a truce for sportsmanship?
In anticipation of the games, messengers were dispatched to announce a truce, or ekekairia, among all Greek city-states and colonies. This temporarily halted all wars and facilitated safe travel to Olympia.
But that's all just to say, ever since the very first modern-day Olympics in 1896, there has been a Catholic mass that occurs before the opening ceremony. I did not know this. I was, like I said, I was not raised Catholic. Never was, never was. So now this has become a part of the opening games, opening ceremonies tradition to have this mass. And not only that, it's become a very entrenched part of it to the point where now the Pope even talks about the Olympics. Let me show you what I mean.
Paris Olympics are underway, and as athletes and spectators travel across the globe, the Vatican urges nations to observe the Olympics truce for peace.
The Olympic truce is a tradition dating back to ancient Greece. It calls for a halt to all conflicts during the Olympic Games and for 7 days before and after to ensure the safe passage of athletes, spectators, artists, and pilgrims to and from the Games. 3,000 years later, it is still being invoked.
May the Olympics be an opportunity to establish a truce, demonstrating a sincere desire for peace.
The first Olympic Mass. Oh my God, please. So this part is a little bit of a side plot, but I have to tell y'all about the church where they had the first Catholic Mass for the Mass of Truce or whatever it was. The Olympic Mass, or the Holy Mass for the opening of the Olympic Truce, is a tradition since 1896 in connection with the Olympic Games, during which the Olympic Truce is officially inaugurated by the celebration of a Catholic Mass in the city hosting the incumbent Olympic Games. Okay, officially inaugurated. The Olympic Truce is officially inaugurated. Now, in Athens, the first Olympic Mass was celebrated in Greece at the Cathedral Basilica of St. Dionysius the Areopagite,
the Catholic Cathedral of St. Dionysius in the center of Athens,
by Father Didon, who in his sermon celebrated the fraternity of peoples, which tends toward the moral unity which Jesus formulated. Sounds Jesuit. Father Didon also expressed his gratitude to the Greek authorities, considering the games a development of the physical force of which Greece was the mother. And blink and you miss it, but peep that name of that church real quick. What's the name of the church where the first Olympic Mass was held at the very first modern day Olympics? Yes, that's right. Cathedral Basilica of St. Dionysius, the Areopagite. So obviously I had to look that place up. And it's named after this guy, St. Dionysius the Areopagite. Now, this dude, he was born into a pagan family, hence the name. He's named after Dionysus, clearly. But he converted, or was converted, to Christianity by the Apostle Paul, St. Paul the Apostle. Now, St. Paul the Apostle comes through Greece, comes through Rome, wherever they are, wherever the guy's living at the time. And Dionysus, St. Dionysus, this guy living as Dionysus, he converts to Catholicism, but he don't change his name. He don't change his name. Now, not only does he convert because of the Apostle St. Paul, but he also just abandons, neglects his wife and his several children to go and gallivant around with Paul. Very Christian thing to do. Leave your wife and kids to go gallivant around with another man. Anyway, his relevance to our little story here is because he became the first ever bishop of Athens, spent the rest of his life converting people from this heathen, pagan Dionysus religion and the mystery cults of antiquity to the, quote, true religion, which they were calling Christianity of the time. And all this while he's still named Dionysus. And then he would later be sainted Dionysus. This is weird to me because other people have changed their name, like Saul to Paul and things like that. I don't know why he would keep the name Dionysus, but whatever. He was born into a pagan household, converts to Christianity, leads him to becoming the first archbishop of Athens, and the church is named after him. The cathedral is named after him, where they had the very first ever Olympic Catholic Mass. Do you see the irony? Like, Olympics were originally like Bacchus festivals, and now it's like this guy with the same name as Bacchus is the saint of the church of the first modern. It's just, what are the chances? Anyway, my main point for that whole story, anyway, if you didn't get any of that, the whole point is this guy, Pierre de Coubertin, who wanted to revamp the modern day Olympics that had been non-existent since antiquity, he decided he also was going to throw in a new additional requirement of a Catholic Mass before the events as a requirement for the ceremony. Then I'll just throw it up here so y'all can see. Here are some other notable masses which have happened. And this tradition has been consistently upheld all the way through 2024. For the 2024 edition, the ceremony was held in the Madeleine Church in Paris. The church had been restored for the occasion. The project did cost about 10 million euros, involved monumental work, both meticulous and large scale. And according to its architect, Thomas Gaudig, during the ceremony to accept the work, more than 150 cubic meters of stone and hundreds of square meters of paving had to be replaced. The Olympic Mass this time was also presided over by Monsignor Laurent Ulrich, Archbishop of Paris. So the Archbishop of Paris, France, did do this opening ceremony Catholic Mass this year for the 2024 Olympics. So the Olympics is very closely intertwined with Catholicism. So it is very surprising to me that they would do this Last Supper thing and it would make it through all of these committees and all of these people and no one would say, hey, this might hurt a Catholic's feelings. Now, since 1956, this Catholic connection with the Olympics has actually increased, with the respective popes making statements and sometimes getting blessings over these Olympicses. So it started in 1956 with the Melbourne Olympics. The various popes, they send official messages. The Pope insists on the harmony of the relationship between Christian principles and sporting activities. And this part I thought to be very important. The Pope insisted on the harmony, the relationship between the Christian principles and the sporting activities. It was up to the athletes to demonstrate in their actions that there's a moral perfection of the soul. So at this point, opinion alert, insert my opinion right here. It's starting to look to me as even like a non-Christian and a never Catholic. I've never been Catholic, okay? And I understand that Catholics are in very large part insulted by this Last Supper depiction because it is featured, this painting is featured specifically in a Catholic cathedral, basilica, whatever it is. But as someone, I'm not a Catholic, I'm understanding the game here. It does appear to me, I have to admit, it looks a little bit like the modern day iteration of the Olympics were definitely started with, at the very extreme least, an attempt to tone down some of that debauchery. Okay. Whether even if it's just like, okay, the cult of Dionysus had infiltrated Christianity and that's who started the Olympics. Even if that's true, the guy wanted to have Catholic Mass before it. The popes were saying that they wanted it to be the moral perfection of the soul. And this isn't liberty. This isn't libertas. This isn't liberté. This is Catholicism, which is a very restrained form of Christianity. Now, I couldn't get through this video without talking a little bit about France itself and its weird AF history. Because as I already mentioned earlier, these opening ceremonies of the modern day Olympics, they are supposed to represent, they are supposed to exalt, they are supposed to showcase the culture of the host country. So first of all, I was very confused. Why on earth? There were so many American artists like Lady Gaga and, Beyonce and all these American artists when they were supposed to be doing French culture. But we had Celine Dion, Canadian. She's from a French speaking part, I think, of Canada though. So that makes sense. Then Lady Gaga sang a song in French as a peacock or something. But people are saying, y'all, you got to chill out. This is France's opportunity to express their culture. And y'all are telling them what their culture is and isn't. Here's the French people telling you what their culture is. You can't get mad at it. So, of course, that led me down the path to research some of the history of France. And I wanted to look specifically at why people were upset about the headless Marie Antoinette and the Les Miserables replay and all that. So let's get into that now. Now, first and foremost, you should know that France is unequivocally credited with inventing the modern day notion of clowns. Those white ones with the big ruffly collars. So that's the modern day clown. That's the blueprint. That's the archetype. And those modern day clowns, they came straight from France. So it did not surprise me to see those abundant in the opening ceremony. And everyone, of course, noticed the decapitated Marie Antoinette. And it was hard to miss the recreation of the Les Mis, Les Miserables. Les Miserables. Les Miserables. Les Miserables. But both of these images, these iconographies of the headless Marie Antoinette, as well as the Les Mis, they both tie back to an extremely important period in France's history called the French Revolution, which lasted from roughly 1789 to 1799. So the French Revolution was a 10-year period of time in France where the people just got fed up. Officially! They just got fed up with France, the old guard, the old regime, the ancient regime, all that. They got fed up with it. They couldn't afford what they needed. There was not enough jobs for them to work. There was a lot of civil unrest. There was a huge financial crisis. France was spending more than half of its revenues incoming from taxes. And at that time, the government of France was getting all the tithes from the church as well. And you weren't allowed to be any other religion. You had to be Catholic and you had to pay tithes. And it was all going to the government. And even then, the government was spending more than half of those revenues coming in just on paying off their debts. Does that sound familiar? Well, the people started to get a little bit pissed off. And one thing leads to another. There's a series of events and now there's a revolution. By the end of the French Revolution, the monarchy was declared abolished, and the people who were serving as king and queen were They were beheaded. That would be Marie Antoinette and her husband, Louis XVI, who Marie Antoinette married when she was just 14 years old before being forced to participate in a public bedding ritual on her wedding night. Don't know what that's about. You could tell me. Also noteworthy, the French monarchy was very far from the only monarchy that was facing run-ins with revolution during this time. People in general, much like today globally, were completely and entirely sick of these freaky, intellectual, weirdo clowns and their and they were actually doing something about it. I'm talking within a 100-year period, we had a revolution in the United States by the colonists. We had a revolution in France. They had revolutions going on over there in Spain. There's wars getting fought in the New World. I mean, it's happening everywhere. Okay? So that's where you get the headless Marie Antoinette reference in the opening ceremony. Then you have the reenactment of Les Miserables, or Les Mis for short. And this is a play which is based on the French Revolution. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the characters or anything like that, but I do want to point to the author of the original book, Les Miserables, which is Victor Hugo. All roads leads to clowns, because guess what other book Victor Hugo wrote? The Man Who Laughs, which is the blueprint for the modern day Joker. And that book is about child traders. So I'll continue. Now, speaking of France and how weird they are, and if you're from France and you're not weird, I believe you. Probably you're fine. But you gotta admit, some of this stuff's a little debauched. There's also an entire school of thought, a philosophy of life, as it were, called libertinage. Libertinage. I don't know, girl. I don't know. My French ain't good. But it's the act of being a libertine. And a libertine is essentially a hedonist. It's someone who does debauched stuff because they just want to and they just like to. And this is a very powerful French, specifically French tradition. There are many, many kings and rulers of France, as well as queens, princesses, and such of France, who have the reputation of being, we'll say, liberal when it comes to, sexuality and things like that. But the libertines weren't just like, oh, eat, drink, be merry. I want to be very clear here. They were debauched. They were doing things with children, unaliving. They were doing body excrement rituals. They were just doing any and everything, because some of them were just up and some of them thought it was going to bring them closer to God. I don't know what the ratios ended up being. Like, for example, one of the first cousins of the French royalty, his name is Marquis de Sade, and, looks like Sade, S-A-D-E. He wrote some of the most disgusting and deplorable books. I wish I didn't learn about him, so I'm not even going to tell y'all which books they were. But I'll put the guy's wiki up here. If you really want to, you can go find what they are about, but I very strongly encourage you not to look it up. But I'm not even sure how the man could have thought. You ever watch a scary movie and you're like, how did someone think of that? And then they had actors play it out. That's what kind of guy this guy was. And he was cousins with the royalty of France. I'm just giving y'all an example of how debauched the people were. This is the French history. This is y'all's monarchy, okay? So Marquis de Sade, he's a prolific author at this point, but he was actually in prison at the Bastille, or maybe he was in an insane asylum by this point. But he was writing all this stuff, and he's in debt, and he's the first cousins with the king and the queen and all this and all that. And it's like, this is the kind of stuff they were doing. This is the kind of stuff they were writing. And just morally, people had enough. It's really, honestly, it's a tale as old as time. This is what is described in Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible, Christian Bible as well. Babylon is another one. The cities, they become so indulgent and excessive that it is their downfall, because there isn't a temperance. And that is kind of what the spirit of Bacchus / Dionysus does seem to encapsulate, based on what I've learned. So Nikki the doll, she posted this incendiary and inflammatory Instagram post stoking the fires. I mean, she could have just acted her little part out and celebrated it, but no, instead she has to attack people and be vicious. And she says, France has always been drag, get over it. And she's not wrong. She's not wrong. But there's some nuance. France has always been drag, if by drag you mean men dressing like this and being opulent and extravagant. Yes, France has seemingly always done that, since it's been called France for sure. That being said, it also resulted in people getting their heads. People have been getting pissed off at it for as long as it's been drag. So historically, in the culture, in the history of France, not only do we have a history of debauchery, excess, libations, ritual orgies, and things like that. Not only that, but we have a history of people getting pissed off at it too. So ruling on the field for me is, to the allegation, this is French history. This is a portrayal of exactly what France is about. I would have to agree with that. I would have to agree with that. We saw other references where they were calling this type of behavior a threat to civilized society. So it's, at this point, the guy, Thomas Jolly, has admitted, yes, this is supposed to be a bacchanalia. It is supposed to be a ritualistic feast. I mean, that's what he said. I had to go look up what it is. I had to go look it up, but he literally said it was supposed to be a pagan festival. And I went and looked up what that meant. And every single festival involving Bacchus/Dionysus has rituals at it, which deal with something depraved. So he told me with his own mouth that this is something depraved. And it absolutely does seem to align with what the French cultural moral values have been. And it does seem to be a long history of the people of France getting kind of pissed off at that. Now, there was another little nuance that I just wanted to tag in here too at this spot. There are operating principles of the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, and there's kind of like rules that they put in place. One of the rules, the threshold standards that they say is that they want to avoid using the games for political reasons. But as we have seen, religion is inextricably intertwined with politics, especially when you're talking about France, Rome, Athens, and all of that. And this has been going on, religion being intertwined with politics since like at least 1300 years before Christ. So then when you add on top of that, the new historical context that we have from the modern day Olympics being started by a Catholic man who wanted to impose Catholic rituals into the opening ceremonies, I mean, it's hard to see how that could even be a rule that could be followed. So it's interesting to see. But I do want to just add my opinion here about what I actually think. Like I said at the beginning, I think the biggest issue is coming down to, was this scene at the 2024 Olympics opening ceremony based on the Last Supper? Or instead, was it based on the Feast of the Gods? Well, in my opinion, I truly believe it is actually combined. I think it's combined. And that leads me to, since we're talking about the classics, I will put in a little logical matrix here. There is a logical fallacy, unfortunately, that I see going around. It seems to me that people are under the impression largely that either this scene must have been inspired by either the Last Supper or the Feast of the Gods. But that's a fallacy. There's actually at least 4 logical possibilities. Number 1, Thomas Jolly's only reference for his piece was the Last Supper. In my opinion, that seems unlikely. Number 2, Thomas Jolly's only reference for the piece was the Feast of the Gods painting. In my opinion, seems equally as unlikely. Another logical option is that Thomas Jolly was not influenced by either of these paintings and everybody's delusional, which seems the least likely of any of them so far because he literally told us himself that he was indeed inspired at least by the Feast of the Gods. Then there's a 4th option. Thomas Jolly was perhaps inspired to create this art piece based on both the Last Supper and the Feast of the Gods. Even if not intentionally, it's impossible that Thomas Jolly could have possibly gotten where he is today as an artist at the level that he is at, living and growing up in France, and didn't see the Last Supper painting 50,11,540,000,000 times. Think about it. How many times have you seen it? It's literally one of the most iconic and recognizable paintings in history. And please note, none of the 4 logical possibilities on the matrix that I built require intention. An intentional act on behalf of Thomas. So Thomas could, unbeknownst to his own self, be being subliminally influenced by the Last Supper, which when I look at the scene, the tableau that he set up, it's impossible to say that it's not at least in some way inspired by the Last Supper. I don't believe that it wasn't. Even if Thomas Jolly doesn't realize it in his mind, it's just obvious that he's seen it so many times, it's just part of his mind. That means there's no requirement he's lying. We don't need to know what's going on in his mind. We don't need to know. It's impossible that the Last Supper did not inspire to some extent this artwork. But that doesn't mean, other half of y'all, that it wasn't also inspired by the Dionysian feast, the Feast of the Gods. Now, putting aside also, we do have some external evidence that we do have, which could impeach Thomas's credibility. That's that Barbara Butch post and then the delete, the fact that it was referred to as the Last Supper in the Wiki article, the fact that it was referred to as the Last Supper in the French interview article with Big Bertha, and the fact that it's just too on the nose. I'm not going to not be able to believe my eyes. I have to trust what I'm seeing. It's obviously inspired by the Last Supper, but I think it is obviously also inspired by a Bacchus festival. And by the end of this project, I now do realize and understand why Christians would take that as a mockery of Jesus. Because what Bacchus and what Dionysus stands for, the vibe, the frequency, the archetype, it is diametrically opposed to the archetype of Jesus Christ or Christ consciousness. The Jesus Christ and the Christ consciousness really does depend on self-suppression. Don't act on all of those carnal up impulses. Maybe don't do that to the child or the goat or the baby snake. You know, don't do that. Maybe don't have a freak off and XY element of P. And Dionysus, he's not condemning that. No. That's his favorite stuff. He's saying, do it. Do it for me. Do it to worship me. So that's my opinion. That's my opinion. Now, I did want to just say, another opinion. It's very interesting to me how the Olympics seemingly got inverted from a Dionysian celebration to honor Zeus to a deeply Catholic religion entrenched ceremony and ritual. It's interesting to me, the first archbishop of Athens, his name is Dionysius, and he didn't bother changing his name. It's interesting to me that that man was born into a pagan family. It's interesting to me that that church named after that man is where they had the first Catholic mass initiating the Mass of the Truce. So it's just interesting to me. That's all I really had for today. In the meantime, facts ain't defamation. Love you, Minnie. Okay, bye. Backtrack.